The Billion-Dollar Vanishing Act. Apple's $31 billion quarterly services revenue is about to hit its first structural ceiling. For a decade, the growth thesis for investors was simple: more apps, more screen time, more 30% cuts. But the rollout of local action models, or LAMs, changes the math. If the goal of the upcoming iOS 27 release is to execute tasks without opening a single third-party app, Apple is effectively building a wall between its users and the storefront that funds its buybacks. We are watching a hardware giant prepare to sacrifice its own software ecosystem to prevent users from migrating to dedicated AI devices. API hijacking as a feature. Most analysts are treating Siri 2.0 as a search upgrade, but the LAM is actually an architecture shift. It does not just talk, it parses the underlying UI tree of your apps to click buttons on your behalf. Think of it as a localized API wrapper that bypasses the graphical interface entirely. When you ask your phone to book a ride or order a coffee, the LAM executes the transaction in the background. The user never sees the app's home screen, never sees the upsell, and never sees the sponsored listings. Apple's marketing calls this intelligence, but for developers, it is a total loss of surface area and brand equity. They are being reduced to back-end service providers for a master operating system. The services revenue collision. There is a reason Kelsey Peterson, Apple's machine learning director, jumped ship to OpenAI just days before WWDC 26. The internal friction between the engineering goal of a zero-touch interface and the finance department's reliance on App Store ad revenue is reaching a breaking point. Currently, Apple makes nearly $1 billion a year just from commissions on generative AI subscriptions. If the system-level agent begins prioritizing its own local models or its partner models like Gemini over third-party apps, it nukes the incentive for developers to build on the platform. You cannot maintain a high-margin services business when you are actively training your customers to ignore the storefront. The developer exodus strategy. Major players are already hedging. Spotify and Uber have been tightening their deep linking permissions to prevent Apple's agent from scraping their data without a direct user visit. This is the hidden battle of 26. Apple is trying to force developers into using App Intents, a framework that essentially hands over the keys to the app's functionality. If you opt in, your app stays relevant in the age of the agent, but you lose the ability to monetize through anything other than the initial transaction. If you opt out, the LAM simply ignores your service in favor of a competitor who is willing to play ball with Siri. It is a classic platform squeeze, disguised as a user experience improvement. The signal under the noise. The transition to an agentic OS is a desperate defensive moat, not a growth engine for the services segment. By moving the execution layer into the kernel via local action models, Apple is trying to ensure that no matter how good OpenAI or Google's cloud agents become, the iPhone remains the only device that can actually touch your local data and apps with zero latency. They are willing to take a hit on App Store discovery and ad impressions if it means preventing a total hardware platform shift toward AI pins or glasses. For investors, the takeaway is clear. The era of double-digit services growth is ending, replaced by a fight to maintain hardware lock-in at any cost. Watch the WWDC keynote for any mention of action commissions, or new transaction fees. That will be the confirmation that the old App Store model is officially being retired in favor of a per-task tax on your digital life. Subscribe for more.